When we sit down, it's time for the conversation, and joining me is Amos Kaburu to put some of these matters or factors into context. We have been talking about the public education system and even the private education system, and the key question is, how safe are our children in these schools? Are there safety guidelines? What do they entail? Who should enforce them? And in case they're breached, who should be held responsible? I'm joined by Amos Kaburu from PAL Network. He's the programs manager. He's very passionate about public education, and he is a great champion of quality in that sector as well as pushing for quantity. Thank you for making time, Amos.
Yes, thank you.
And yours is a very expansive career vitae in terms of the education sector, as the viewers can just see on the screen in terms of your profile in the education sector. However, the education sector is not looked at with a lot of pride and a lot of hope as the private sector is. And the reason being, there are questions in terms of quality. And even if we look at the Kakamega school, people are saying the number 3,000 is such a huge number of kids to have in school. However, you think otherwise. You say these are the schools of the future: Kakamega Primary, Bungoma DEB, Machakos Primary School. Why do you think that going scale is the future of education?
We have to be a bit realistic with the nature of our demographics. And one reality is that we're on such an upward trend as far as population is concerned. So we're not seeing the numbers come down as Africans. Our average annual population growth is 3.5%. And if you look at the statistics around numbers, about 10 years ago, we were less than 40 million. Now we're almost inching at 50 million. That tells that another 10 years will be close to 60 million people, going by the trends. And forget about the Nairobi noise that you see, the few middle class. The people in the village are still working very hard to get children. So population will keep on increasing. And so you really therefore have to think of how do you provide solutions to such large numbers. That is number one. Number two, you also look at the trends around our occupation and settlement patterns. And one of the realities is that by the year 2050, we will have close to 70% of Kenyans living in urban areas. So you therefore have to think of service provision, and particularly provision of infrastructure for schools, for healthcare, and other social amenities that really have to be configured for scale. So you cannot be thinking of every small institution. Number three is to look at the economies of scale that come with an economically sustainable units, such as if you have a city with 1,000 people, it will be extremely expensive to manage it. So it's the same thing. You also have to think of categorization of schools, so that you have to think of what you call small schools. These are schools that will be taking care of the equity models, where settlement patterns, perhaps they are sparsely populated. These are regions which perhaps highly marginalized. So you have to think of perhaps small schools. Then you talk about medium-sized schools. Maybe these are schools that in future we may have to think about 1,000 children. But now we have now to think now of large schools, particularly for urban areas.
However,
you cannot have a school in an urban area that has 200 children, because why would you take a school with 5 acres, for instance in Nairobi, in a place such as Westlands, where it will cost you about 350 million to buy 1 acre of land? Why would you spare 5 acres to put in a school 200 children, whereas you can still spend the same money perhaps on other things, lease out and get money that can service other sectors? So these are broad conversations. This is the reality that we have to confront. We cannot sit on our laurels and believe that we can configure, design, implement education the way it was 40, 50, 100 years ago.
Okay, and when you talk about scale, 1,000 students, 3,000 students, going back to Kakamega Primary School, there's a serious issue in terms of staffing. 73 teachers thereabout for 3,000 pupils, 3 masters on duty for 3,000. That means a teacher for every 1,000 pupils. There is a huge gap in terms of staffing. Yet we have teachers who are trained and they're in the job market. That discord, how do we get over it?
73 teachers are the ones who are employed by the Teacher Service Commission. The reality of the matter is that Kakamega has more than 90 teachers because the rest are actually employed by parents. We know that parents are shouldering the burden, and therefore we also have to be a bit responsible in what we say. We have to be more truthful in what we report, that these numbers are not just about the TSC teachers. We must be looking at the resources, because if we really want to get the actual cost of education, then we should be able to put in the direct as well as the indirect costs of it. And part of it has got to do with what parents are spending as out-of-pocket expenditure on education. Buying uniform, provision of food, provision of healthcare, transport facilities for the children way back to school, uniforms, and many, many other things, including setting up of infrastructure in schools, is a cost that is just have to be borne by the parents. So often in this conversation we seem to lose it. But the reality of the matter is that yes, are these numbers sufficient? Point is that anecdotal evidence would be that these numbers are not sufficient. Why? Because we do not have a framework of, one, how to recognize, how to plan, how to institutionalize mechanisms around managing big schools. That is what we are lacking in this case. So that first of all, we're able to define what makes a big school. And now when you have a big school, how do you manage a big school? That's what you need to appreciate. Is, you see, and there's something good that you have to talk to planners. I think in this country the challenge we have is that we are very casual and very pedestrian in how we plan, particularly for the social sector. If you talk, for instance, to the Institute of Kenyan Planners, and they tell you what ideal would happen, for instance, in an urban area. If you go to a place such as Kilimani, how many people were planned to live in such a place? So that when you look at the sewerage system, the drainage, and the number of people that you are giving water or you're giving electricity, it is based on actual numbers together with the projection.
However, so your point, let me get your point straight. In terms of staffing of these schools, how do we go about to ensure we have big schools? You've already said they're the future, and you've said this is the direction that we need to go. How do we go about staffing the school? There
are many things that could be considered. Number one, there is nothing that is cast on stone that a school should operate from 8 to 5. One of the things that will even work is a shift system. Start school at 6, finish with some up to noon. Let others come in at 1 and continue up to 6 in the evening. There is nothing wrong. You cannot keep children in school from 6 up to 6. In fact, what people are losing in this conversation is that children were basically doing extra tuition, which first of all has been outlawed. It's another contradiction in our policy. So I will start with that one first of all. Now you also need to ask yourself, what are you teaching these children? Do you need to keep children in school from Monday to Friday doing the same chemistry, doing the same mathematics, doing the same English? Or do you need to reconfigure the curriculum that you are giving to children in such big environments so that you're able to address their needs? That's why this is not a matter of, for instance, calculating to say that if you have got this number of, if you've got these bundles of unga, you're able to make this number of chapatis. That is not how you configure education for quality. Configuration for quality is a bit different than for the quantities. So what we are missing in this conversation, we are configuring education for quantity rather than configuring education for quality. The configuration for quality must take into consideration certain components to be quite clear on what we want to achieve. And in such a process, you are now able to develop what you call outcome-based policies, so that you have a policy that is beginning with an end in mind, that perhaps say that we want all children to have achieved this and this. Then you apply what you call reverse logic, so that you're able to ask yourself that what are the inputs towards achieving whatever you want to achieve. But not this kind of madness that is being overseen by Jogo House, which looks extremely clueless on what it's doing. I want us to get a little deeper into the Kakamega story, and it's not just the only tragedy that we've seen in the education sector. Unfortunately, we saw precious talent in last year. Yes, in 2017 there was a kid that fell out of a bus in Mombasa. So from this tragedy and many other cases that go unreported. Exactly. So what do you read as someone in the education sector? What would you read as some of the causes behind some of these calamities? General negligence on the part of the duty bearers is the greatest tragedy of this country, that the duty bearers have basically refused to do their work. And we need to look at this from a broader context of what we refer to as consumer protection in this country. It's pretty low, and that's why the media is splashed with the stories of how Kenyans are being fed on mercury, how Kenyans are being fed on anything, how the kind of vehicles that we are boarding are not appropriate, the kind of content that is being given by some of our media houses is completely inappropriate for the children to watch. Whatever we are consuming from China, from everywhere, it is not. basically in this country, anything can kill you at any given time.
Yeah.
And that explains why these kind of problems are also able to stretch into some of the sectors such as healthcare and such as education. In fact, if you are, for instance, to look at the healthcare sector, maybe you will be shocked to an extent that there are a lot of dangerous drugs that are on the market, some that have expired. And we actually just saw the other day a vehicle that was intercepted coming from Garissa, which was basically carrying contraband, which were even expired in the name of drugs. And these drugs actually end up getting spaces on the shelves, especially in informal settlements, especially in rural areas where enforcement is a serious problem. So who are the duty bearers?
Okay.
We have got organizations and institutions that are charged with the responsibility of ensuring that the public consumes what is appropriate for it.
And one of them is organizations.
Yeah, one of them is KEBS. We should be asking KEBS, what are the standards that we need to apply? Because every aspect in this country has got benchmarks. It has got standards. Even if they are not there, we have international standards that should be applied. Today, for instance, while I was doing my literature review, I came across standard ISO 1440. And ISO 1440 is what gives us the standards as far as development of infrastructure is concerned. But whoever thinks about such. So we need to go and ask KEBS, do we have these standards in place? And if they are there, what is the enforcement? We have seen the director of DCI set up small units such as the ones for anti-counterfeit. But when you have got a unit with 300 police, how do they enforce all these things across the country?
Hold that
Public
thought.
awareness.
Hold that thought, because you've mentioned infrastructure and the built environment. I want us to talk about that briefly. And it's not just the first time that we are seeing infrastructure being maybe the cause of the problem. In Dagoretti, 8 kids lost their life because of poor infrastructure. How does the built environment look like in the country? Because the tragedies are becoming way too many.
The built environment in this country is chaotic. It is chaotic because, and we're beginning to see a proliferation of masqueraders who are calling themselves professional bodies.
Okay.
An engineer spends 6 years in the university, comes out, they are told that they must still be registered with the Engineering Registration Board.
Yes.
You have got lawyers who've spent a lot of time studying in school and they are coming out and being told that you must go to the Kenya School of Law. You've got even right now HR practitioners being told that they must go through some funny exams for them to become certified to practice to become HR. So the built environment is equally going through the same turmoil. So you've got, it is largely scattered, because who are the stakeholders involved in the built environment? You have first of all to think of the project initiator. This is the person in need of perhaps an infrastructure. A school will say, we want an infrastructure. This school should be able to come up with a charter for that infrastructure, to say, we want an infrastructure that will serve this number of children, because we have this size of land. And based on that, they should now be able to commission an architecture to do the architectural drawings that will say that yes, this is the view of how the ultimate house will look like. And using these architectural designs, they should now be able to hand them over to a structural engineer. A structural engineer will be looking at what it will mean for this building to become structurally sound, for it to last for this particular number of years. 80 years, 100 years. You just walk down here and see Kipanda House, look across the road and see the Standard Chartered Bank building over here. These buildings have been in existence for over 100 years. How many other buildings? Look at KICC, the way it was set up. It's a building that is structural. So not some of these apartments that we are now seeing coming up in Nairobi and falling on people every time. The person who will tell you whether this building is fit for purpose will be a structural engineer. Then once this one, let me just finish up on it, because we're talking about the built environment. Once the structural engineer has given you what is supposed to be done, the quantity surveyor will therefore give you the quantities that you need for you to be able to achieve the kind of project that you want. And based on it now, you are now supposed to seek for approval. Approval has actually now been devolved to the county governments. But when you have got the kind of inefficient, poor, weak, almost moribund kind of institution that we have in terms of approvals in our county governments, they end up approving structures that are not structurally sound. So it is a whole conglomeration, it is a whole whole continuum of stakeholders who are involved in that sector. That if you have to think, and lastly, even you have now the contractors who are basically, so when there is any form of corruption at any given point, because people want to beat the system, the approval does not even go to the ground to really confirm whether that land is there or not. Even when the building is under construction, because you're supposed to have a charter that says that, and you've seen like for government projects, they'll have put somewhere to say that this is a project of a road connecting Ngong Road to this point.
I want to bring in Sosion into the conversation. Just hold that thought. And because you're raising a very pertinent issue, that the build sector in the country is not synergized. So everybody is operating in a vacuum, and that creates room for loopholes and shortcuts. And when Sosion was speaking during the burial of the kids in Kakamega, he said the kids died because of negligence. That could be negligence. Avoided. Now, before we cross over to that bite, you can always be a part of this conversation. You can always text us through 20146 and tell us what your thoughts are this from the conversation. Let's cross into Sosion and listening what he had to say.
Someone is responsible for the death of these children. Negligence. Hawa watoto waliangukiana kwa congestion out of negligence of the Ministry of Education of not guiding the school properly. The law is clear. Establish Education Standards and Quality Assurance Committee under Section 64, 65, 66. This has not been done by the current minister, not yet.
You have just agreed with what Sosion has said.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes. The point is that when we have the kind of challenges that we have, the duty bearers is the Minister of Education. Why? One, it owns the schools. So as an owner of an infrastructure, as an owner of a school, if you have a house, you have a responsibility to take care of your house. The Minister of Education has neglected their own schools, and yet even parents are helping them to set up.
But what has happened to the quality assurance officers?
Number two, the Minister of Education is supposed to have what you call the Education Standards and Quality Assurance Council, a semi-autonomous government agency established according to Basic Education Act of 2013, Article 65, 66, and 67, that is supposed to enforce provisions of standards as far as infrastructure is concerned. None of the cabinet secretaries, starting with Professor Kaimenyi, coming down to Dr. Matiang'i, later on to Amina Mohammed, and now we have got Professor Magoha, the tough-talking Professor Magoha. None of them has actually been quite deliberate in terms of ensuring that the SCAC is up and running. So when you have got a whole unit of quality assurance that, number one, has a serious shortage of staff, number two, they are not properly facilitated in terms of resources, because maybe you have got Quality Assurance Council. For that Kakamega County where I come from, we have got 12 sub-counties. Now for the 12 sub-counties, we just have like 15 quality assurance officers. And yet Kakamega itself has more than 1,000 public primary schools. It has got more than 400 public secondary schools. You have not talked about the private schools. And all of them are supposed to be quality assured by these quality assurance officers. How will they move from one point to the other point? Starting all the way from Butere, coming all the way to my home here in Lugari and going to Likuyani. It's almost impossible. So the Minister of Education should come out of the shell and do what it's supposed to do. That is why they are being appropriated resources. Employ quality assurance officers, have a quality management framework that will guide this kind of work, so that people are also not operating in a vacuum. If you are going to tell us that you are going to close schools, how will you close schools even when you do not even have a definition of what makes a good infrastructure?
We'll cross over to closing schools in a bit, but in terms of professional negligence, do you mind just expounding, because blame is being thrown to different parties. You understand? But from a teacher's point of view, and you've been in the education sector long enough, who is liable for this negligence? And we'll get on to
it is the Minister of Education, because you see, as the owner of the schools, I should not be allowing anybody to put up a substandard building on my house. I have my home in Lugari. There is no way my neighbor, let alone even my brother or my mother whom we share a compound, can begin setting up a building without my authority. I must approve it. So who puts up inferior infrastructure on the Ministry of Education land? The Ministry of Education must be bold and say, if you're going to put up infrastructure on our schools, it must meet certain demands. And that is what is supposed to happen. In fact, the law is very clear, a Kenyan legal proverb that says the law is very clear. Education should be free, and compulsory.
Yes.
And the person who has a responsibility to do that is supposed to be government. But even where we are intervening to support government by generating other resources away from the public funds, because the ministry has not been allocating resources for development of infrastructure, it should come out clearly and say that yes, even if you've put in resources, this is what it defines to be a classroom. In fact, we do not have a definition of a school in this country. That is a school 2 acres, is a school on 3 acres, is a school what? The kind of madness that we are presiding over as a country, it is extremely alarming. And that's why I agree with Zoziono that we have no idea what the future will look like. Because we need someone to be very bold and say, for us to secure the future of our children, we have to stop all these things and ask ourselves, what are we doing? What do we want to achieve? Then we plan on that basis.
We are almost running out of time, so I'd like to bring in Magoha very briefly. But before we do that, when Precious Talent Academy collapsed, or rather caved in on some of his students, we saw the government begin a crackdown.
Yeah.
And we saw Magoha walk around Nairobi with his team, and they were demolishing schools that they thought weren't up to standards in terms of infrastructure and the safety of the kids. Let's listen into that bite on Magoha talking about demolition of unworthy structures.
Shutting down schools that we feel are an immediate risk to our children. So even here in Kibera, you may find 1 or 2 others being shut down. Then there is a medium-term framework, which there's a committee that is working on, which will come with a blueprint where we shall say, well, first of all, as we shut down the larger number of schools, where do we take the children to? Because it is the child that we are working for. In the long term, we shall enforce the law as is required.
So we see Professor Magoha saying we shall enforce the law and we shall be bringing down structures that are not good enough or safe for our kids. However, another tragedy. Are these knee-jerk reactions, or they're making headway? And in case of these tragedies, how do we go back to the drawing board and find the root cause so that we avoid such tragedies over and over again?
Thank you. The direct answer is that yes, these are knee-jerk reactions, whether we call them reactive or what, and they just temporary measures. They don't solve anything. The reality of the matter is that we have a serious shortage of schools, perhaps for places like Nairobi and other urban areas, Mombasa and Kisumu. These other places they are not typical urban areas. They still have chunk of land and people can move for distance, but these 3 are highly affected. So let's work with one analogy and ask ourselves, if today every Kenyan parent chose to take their children to a public school, what will happen? The reality of the matter is that the system will basically collapse, because we do not even have schools. So one of the things you have to appreciate, that these parents, when they take their children to these unworthy structures, it's not because they have choice. In most cases, they have little choice. Because you're talking about very few schools around the area, such as Kibra. For more than 50,000 children who need to go to school, they just have about 4 schools. Where do you take Ayani?
So what do we do?
Olympics. So we have to rethink of, one, what is the relationship between the public and the private sector, so that the people who are putting up the small little schools could be put together to raise these sufficient resources, so that we can put up a big school that serves the public. Because what is the interest of the private sector? The interest of the private sector is to make a profit, or to make something out of their money. So if you convince them that there is an instrument, a financial instrument, which they would tap into, that will still guarantee them a reasonable return on their investment, it is better, because they do not have the capacity and sometimes the bureaucracy necessary and needed for them to run such a technical sector such as education. So we have to redefine the relationship between the private and the public sector. And this is something that we really have to do urgently, because no country can develop on the basis of private education.
Yes.
The sustainability of our education must be public, and public must work for one reason. Nobody is guaranteed of tomorrow. Public is a fallback position for everyone. I can assure you that if you are traveling today and you get a road accident, the most likely place you'll be taken to a public hospital.
Is a public hospital.
So when you don't have money, where will your children go to school? Make that public school next to your house to be a good place where you feel comfortable, whether it means zoning, and we have to do the same even until we remove these things we are calling boarding schools.
Yes.
To really make sure that our schools are schools which Our children can walk to schools. Not this kind of burdens of seeing 4 a.m. buses are roaming all over in the name of picking children.
Yeah.
Public education has to work for all children.
Okay, now we are almost coming to a close of this conversation. However, as I had mentioned earlier, you can always be part of this discussion. Metropole Debrief is a conversation and everybody's voice matters. So 20146, send in your feedback and we shall be sampling some of that feedback. Before we leave, there's a bite by Sosion, and he's giving the Ministry of Education and the country and the president at large ultimatums. Let's listen in and then 30 seconds on your final thoughts.
We are making the following demands. One, lazima tuwe na public health report kwa kila shule, particularly where there have been issues. Hiyo ya Nairobi na hii ya Kakamega. Tunataka inspection report ya public health. Number 2, tunataka inspection report ya public works. Mheshimiwa Parani. That must be done. And then number 3, quality assurance report kutoka kwa Ministry of Education. Bila hiyo maneno mengine yote itakuwa public relation ya kudanganyana na tungojea watoto wengine wakufe. Tunasikizana? Tunasikizana? Bila hiyo tukisikia mkasa mwingine kama huu katika jamhuri, tutasimamisha masomo kila mahali katika jamhuri kufanya.
Quite a tough stand there by Sosion. Any other incident, then we down our tools. Your 2 cents, 30 seconds on those ultimatums.
This government never works with ultimatums.
Give Kenyans a little bit of hope.
I am not convinced that government is going to improve the situation anytime soon.
So
it's a deeper and complex
But we
issue.
cannot sit back and wait for more kids to die.
Public awareness should play a bigger role. The media continue to doing what you're doing. Parents also have a role to ask what kind of environment their children are being taken in. We operate a highly liberalized market. If you don't feel your child is in a safe school, remove them. Walk to that county governor's office, whether it means to demonstrate. Ask that some of these things are brought down. We do not have deficiency of rules and laws to enforce. In fact, I'm wondering why the CS is asking for permission to enforce the law. Just enforce the law.
Okay, just enforce the law. 20146, that's our number. You can always reach out to us. Earlier on, during the day, we had asked, who do you think should be held liable for some of these mishaps that we've seen in the education sector? And they're not just mishaps, they are gross and great tragedies that are costing children their lives. 8 children at the Precious Talent School. Now 15 children in Kakamega and scores injured, and the traumatic memory left in those children cannot be erased anytime soon. So we're going to take a short break. When we come back, my voice, your voice comes on and my mic goes off on Social Watch, and we shall be sampling some of your feedback, both the voice note, some of the messages you've left on Twitter, and also Street Talk. Stay with Metropole TV.